The anxiety mutation of the first great apes was based on the appearance of a new constant modulation of the electromagnetic emission of the brain nerve cells. Let's call it alpha protowaves. Meanwhile, the beta waves range is the most common state of the modern mind. We are then focused on receiving external stimuli with the five senses, but the beta waves occur primarily during thinking and the verbal communication. Interestingly, our brain also emits the beta waves when we experience the emotions, joy, anger. This confirms my thesis about the evolutionarily common nature of the anxiety, the emotions, and the consciousness. We can therefore conclude that the brain anxiety emission, thanks to the discovery already by the very small children of the anti-anxiety role of the symbolic activity, largely turns into the consciousness brain emission with everything that the consciousness means: thoughts, words, feelings. In animals, there was no such evolution of the brain electromagnetic emissions, because the first step of this brain emission evolution in the form of the permanent anxiety electromagnetic brain emission that we have in humans did not exist. In animals, the brain does present electromagnetic wave emissions, but these emissions are only an echo of the electromagnetic processes taking place in different parts of the brain. Of course, in the humans, these processes also take place, and their echo also reaches beyond the brain box in the form of the electromagnetic waves. But in the humans, this echo is superimposed on the constant anxiety wave emission of the brain as a whole during the waking period. Thus, the EEG of the evolutionarily higher animals simply represents the electromagnetic activity of the brain structures. In humans, however, the EEG shows, apart from the electromagnetic activity of all brain structures, separately, also the activity of the brain as a whole. And this activity is the anxiety activity during the waking period, in its purest form, recognizable in the EEG as the alpha waves, and the symbolic activity, waves accelerating in relation to the alpha waves, that's beta and gamma waves. There is a beautiful evidence that the symbolic activity and the anxiety activity in the brain are not the result of the electromagnetic activity of some brain structures responsible for thinking, feeling, or words formation, but it's the effect of the electromagnetic wave emission of the brain as a whole. Each of us knows very well that it's impossible to think or feel in parallel. In other words, it's impossible to think of even just two concepts at once, let alone the possibility of time parallel thinking or feeling. Everyone knows that the parallel discourse is impossible for the human brain. This phenomenon is commonly used, for example, in the hypnotic techniques. Knowing that the human brain is unable to develop two thoughts at the same time, the hypnotist offers the hypnotized person words that are not related to each other. Since this is an impossible task for the brain, our brain simply pauses for a moment, unable to decide which of the suggested paths to choose, because only one way can be followed. Our brain is monothematic. If some brain substructures were responsible for thinking and feeling in our brain, there would be no obstacle for our brain to be able to think of many things simultaneously, even 10 or 100 things at once. Meanwhile, no man on earth can go beyond this limit, the limit of one-way thinking. The impossibility of the parallel symbolism of the brain cannot be explained except by the fact that the symbolic activity is not born in any structure of the brain, but is the result of the electromagnetic wave emission of the brain as a whole. If the brain regions were responsible for thinking and feeling, then it would not be surprising that we would be thinking about several things at once. More, then we could even experience completely contradictory feelings such as both sadness and joy. It is not possible, and such an impossibility would be inexplicable if there were sets of neurons specialized in thinking and feeling. There would be no reason for these cell teams specialized in thinking or feeling to be, to be more than one in the brain. Just one set of the neurons would then be enough to initiate a thought or a feeling. Thus, our brain would be able to simultaneously conduct millions, even billions of independent thought operations. Meanwhile, surprisingly, the human brain, so admired for its extraordinary abilities, is able to carry out only one mental operation at a time. This is such a simple and banal observation that is surprising that until now, until you hear this in my mouth, it has not been noticed and has not given to the world of science an opportunity to draw the scientific consequences from such an observation. But it's not the first time that the science has overlooked what is the most obvious. And there is only one consequence of this observation of the monorail functioning of the human brain. Thinking and feeling are functions of the entire brain as a whole.